Success isn't built on luck. It is forged through iron grit and the refusal to stay down when life hits hard. Watch the most inspiring stories of perseverance and the ultimate climb back to the top. Click subscribe now and fuel your own fire with our narratives.
Dad was already sitting at the kitchen table when I came downstairs that morning, not eating, not reading the paper. Just sitting there with his hands folded in front of him, staring at the door like he'd been waiting for hours. He probably had been. The acceptance letter from the Nashville School of Design was still on the counter where I'd left it the night before. I hadn't tried to hide it. Part of me, I think, wanted him to find it. "Sit down, Vivian," he said. Not good morning, not honey, just my full name, the way he only ever used it when someone was in serious trouble. I sat. He didn't say anything for a long time. My dad is the kind of man who believes silence is a weapon, and he knew how to use it. 31 years as a corporate attorney will do that to a person. He'd made partners cry in deposition rooms. He'd won cases nobody thought were winnable. He understood that the person who speaks first almost always loses. I've refused to be that person. So we sat there, the two of us, while the refrigerator hummed and the coffee maker beeped from across the room, and the morning light came in flat and gray through the window over the sink. Finally, he pushed the letter across the table toward me. "You want to explain this?" I looked at it. I'd read it so many times the night before that I had most of it memorized. "Congratulations, Ms. Holloway. We are pleased to offer you a place in our Master of Fine Arts program. It's a design program," I said, "for furniture, handcrafted furniture, and I know what it is." His voice was very quiet. That was never a good sign. Loud meant blowing off steam. Quiet meant something had been decided. "What I want to know is what you were thinking when you applied for it without telling your mother and me. Because I knew you'd say no." He nodded slowly, like I just confirmed something he already suspected. "And you thought that if you just went ahead and, Dad," I took a breath. "I've been making furniture since I was 19. I've been selling it since I was 22. I have a workshop in the garage that you pretend doesn't exist and a waiting list of 12 people for my next collection. And I think, a hobby." He said it like he was closing a file. "A profitable hobby. Fine. Good for you. But a master's degree in..." He looked at the letter again. "Furniture design. Vivian, you have a business degree. You have a job at Whitmore and Associates that your uncle worked very hard to get you. You have a future that doesn't involve sawdust." "That future is yours," I said, "not mine." That was the moment. I saw it happen across his face, the shift from cold to something colder. The attorney going somewhere and something more elemental taking over. The father who had always been the one to define what success looked like in our family and had never, not once, had that definition questioned. "Then I don't know what future you think you have," he said. "Because you are not doing this under my roof. You are not embarrassing this family by throwing away everything we've given you to go play with wood in Tennessee. Nashville is, I don't care where it is." He stood up. He was still very calm. That was the worst part, how calm he was. "If you walk out that door to go to that program, you don't come back. I mean that. You don't come back for dinner. You don't come back for Christmas. You don't come back at all. You want to make your own choices? Fine, make them. But you don't get to make them with my money and my name propping you up." I thought about a lot of things in that moment. I thought about the dining room table I built the summer I was 23. The one my mom covered with a tablecloth so her friends wouldn't know it wasn't store-bought. I thought about the workshop my dad called that shed. The smell of fresh-cut walnut and linseed oil. The way a piece of wood feels under your hands when you finally understand it. I thought about 12 people who'd paid deposits on furniture that didn't exist yet, who trusted me enough to wait. I thought about how tired I was. "Okay," I said. He blinked. I don't think he expected that. "Okay," I said again, and I pushed back my chair and stood up. "I'll get my things." I was out of the house by noon. My aunt let me sleep on her couch for 3 weeks while I figured out my next move. She's my mom's younger sister, the one the family has always described as artistic, in that slightly apologetic tone they use for anything that doesn't have a dental plan. She didn't ask me a lot of questions. She just made sure there was coffee in the morning and didn't mention my dad once. I deferred my acceptance at the design school, not because I changed my mind, because I had 11 people still waiting on furniture and I owed them something before I could afford to think about my own next step. I worked 18-hour days for 4 months. I had been building furniture in my parents' garage for 6 years. mostly selling through word of mouth and a small online shop I'd set up during the pandemic. My pieces were big, heavy, handmade dining tables, bed frames, bookshelves with dovetail joints I cut by hand. I charged more than most people expected. I had to, because good hardwood costs what it costs, and I refused to compromise on materials. But people kept buying. They kept telling their friends. I had a 2-year-old dining table in a house in Atlanta that had been featured in a regional design magazine, and I hadn't even known about it until someone emailed me the scan. After I left my parents' house, something shifted in how I worked. I don't know how to explain it except to say that when you no longer have anything to lose, you stop making safe choices. I started building pieces I'd never had the nerve to build before, a live-edge desk in black walnut with brass inlay that I genuinely didn't know if anyone would buy. A dining table with an asymmetrical base that looked structurally impossible until you understood the engineering. A set of bookshelves with a hidden compartment I designed from a sketch I'd had in a notebook since I was 20. I posted them. People lost their minds. By the time I enrolled in the Nashville program 8 months after I left home, I was doing more business than I could comfortably handle on my own. I hired one assistant, then another. I moved into a proper workshop space outside the city. I started saying no to commissions that didn't interest me, which is a terrifying thing to do when you're 28 and theoretically building something from scratch, but every time I did it, something better came through the door a week later. The design school was 2 years. I won't pretend it was easy. It's humbling to be back in a classroom, to have your instincts questioned and your techniques criticized by people who know more than you. But I was also the only student in the program who had been running a real business for 6 years, and there were moments when the theoretical caught up to the practical in ways that made everything suddenly click into place. I understood joinery at a molecular level by the time I finished. I understood material science and load distribution and the psychology of how people interact with objects they live with every day. I graduated and immediately spent 3 months designing a collection I called Watershed. 11 pieces, all hardwood walnut, white oak, cherry, each one named after a different American river. The design language was severe and quiet and completely unlike anything I had made before. I built a small website, hired a photographer I'd met in Nashville who was so good it almost hurt, and launched it on a Tuesday morning in October with no advertising, no influencer partnerships, no PR strategy of any kind. By Friday, I had inquiry emails from 4 different galleries. The one from the gallery in Asheville was different from the others. It was written by the gallery director herself, a woman named Simone who had been running the space for 20 years and had a reputation for being either a genius or impossible to work with, depending on who you asked. She said she wanted to fly out and see the pieces in person. She said she didn't make offers she hadn't stood in front of. She came the following Tuesday. She walked around my workshop for 40 minutes without saying much of anything. She ran her hands along the surface of the desk I called Cumberland. She crouched down to look at the underside of the dining table, at the way the legs met the apron, and made a small sound I couldn't interpret. Then she straightened up and said, "How do you feel about a solo show?" I told her how I felt about it. The show ran for 6 weeks the following spring. I came for opening night and planned to stay for the weekend. I ended up staying for 3 weeks. I won't give you all the numbers right now because they still feel unreal to me, but I will tell you that by the end of the run, every piece had sold. I will tell you that 2 of the buyers were collectors I had only ever seen mentioned in art publications I followed, the way some people follow sports teams, as in people I had genuinely never expected to be in the same room with. I will tell you that Simone called me on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the show closed, and offered me a deal for a second collection that made me sit down on the floor of my workshop and stay there for a while. The second collection took 18 months. I was more ambitious and more terrified in equal measure. I brought in a metalworker I'd met in Asheville to collaborate on some of the hardware, which meant learning to have conversations about my own work in a way I'd never had to before. I hired a third assistant. I turned down a licensing deal that would have paid well and required me to compromise on materials. The second show was in Charleston. Larger space, longer run, more press. By the time it closed, my work had been written about in 4 national publications. I had a 2-year waiting list for commission pieces. Simone was talking about New York. And then the collector called. He was quiet and methodical on the phone, the kind of person who had clearly thought through everything he wanted to say before dialing. He represented a private foundation I'd heard of at the periphery of the design World, the kind of entity that buys work not to display it in a home, but to preserve it, to loan it to institutions, to treat it as the art it was. He wanted to know if I would consider selling him the rights to license 3 pieces from the first watershed collection for a traveling museum exhibition on contemporary American craft. I asked for 2 weeks to think about it. He said, of course. I thought about it for 11 days and said yes. That deal, the licensing agreement, the foundation purchase, the museum acquisition fees, the subsequent collector interest that followed the exhibition announcement came to just over $18 million. I am not going to pretend that number felt real when I first saw it in writing. It didn't. It still doesn't, fully. I had grown up in a house where money was used as a measuring stick for love, and I had spent years building something that had nothing to do with that kind of measuring, and now I was looking at a figure that my father, the man who had made partner at 40 and considered that the definition of a life well lived, would probably never see in his career. I bought a piece of land outside Knoxville. Not a house, not yet land. 10 acres of it, mostly wooded, with a creek running along the eastern edge and a view of the mountains on a clear day. I had an architect draw up plans for a workshop and a residence that would grow around the work rather than the other way around. I did not call my parents. My brother reached out first. He sent a text, which was so typical of him I almost laughed. Not a call, not an email, a text, casual and slightly misspelled, like he was messaging someone he'd seen last week. Hey, heard you've been doing really well. Been thinking about you. Would love to catch up if you're ever in town. I stared at it for a long time. My brother is 2 years older than me. Growing up, we weren't enemies exactly, but we weren't close either. He was everything my dad had ever wanted pre-law. At 20, law school. At 22, junior associate at a firm in Chicago. By 25, he wore the achievement like a suit he'd had made for him. He never questioned it. He was good at the life my father had designed for him, and I had always privately thought that was both his greatest strength and the saddest thing about him. We hadn't spoken since I left my parents' house. Not once in 4 years. Would love to catch up. I didn't respond right away. I waited a week, partly because I was busy and partly because I wanted to see what would come next. Sure enough, another text arrived 4 days later. Hey, I know we left things kind of weird. I just really miss my sister. Let me know if you want to grab a coffee sometime. No pressure. I called him. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting for it. We talked for about 15 minutes, and it was mostly fine, careful, a little stilted, the way conversations are when 2 people are both aware that they're performing a version of normalcy for each other. He asked about my work in a way that made it clear he had looked me up online, but didn't want to admit how closely he'd looked. I asked about his firm. He told me he'd made senior associate. I said congratulations and meant it mostly. Then he said, so I actually kind of have something I wanted to run by you. I waited. I'm in a situation, he said, with some debt, student loans, some other stuff. It's gotten kind of unmanageable, and I was wondering if, you've obviously done incredibly well, and I just thought maybe there was some way you could help me out. Like a loan. I'd pay you back. There it was. I had been ready for it. I think I had been ready for it from the moment his first text came in, which maybe says something about my brother and maybe says something about me. I stayed quiet for a moment, not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I wanted to say it right. I love you, I said. I genuinely do, and I'm glad you reached out. But I'm not going to do that. He made a sound that was somewhere between surprise and offense. Vivian, I'm not going to do that, I said again. Not because I can't, but because I spent 4 years building something while nobody in this family wanted to know about it, and now that there's money attached to it, that's the reason for the call. That's the reason you miss your sister, and I think you're smarter than that, and I think someday you're going to feel bad about it. And I hope when that happens, you reach out again. I'll answer. He didn't say much after that. We got off the phone shortly after. I sat in my workshop for a while. Outside, the wind was moving through the trees along the edge of my property, and the mountains were doing what they do in Tennessee in the late afternoon, going from blue to purple to something that doesn't quite have a name. My mother called the following week. She didn't mention money at all, which almost made it harder. She was warm and chatty and asked about my health, my food, whether I was seeing anyone. She mentioned that my dad's back had been bothering him. She mentioned that the holidays were coming up, and wouldn't it be nice? She talked for 40 minutes and said almost nothing, and under the surface of all of it, I could feel the shape of what she wasn't saying. At the end, she said, "Your father and I just want to know you're okay." I said I was okay, and we've been thinking about you a lot, she said, about how things were left. We love you, Vivian. We always have. I hope you know that. I did know that in the complicated way you know things about people who hurt you without ever quite meaning to. I knew she loved me. I knew my father loved me in the only language he had ever learned. I know, I said. We'd love to have you for Christmas, she said, if you want. I'll think about it, I said. That's all we ask, she said. I haven't been back for Christmas. I'm not sure I will be, not this year. But I'm not sure I will be, not this year. But I'm not sure I won't be either, which is the most honest I can be about it. Some doors don't have to be closed forever to be closed for now. I'm writing this from the residence that's been built on my land now, in a room I designed specifically to face the mountains. My workshop is 50 feet away, connected by a covered walkway I put in last winter. I have 3 people who work for me full-time and 1 part-time. There is a waiting list for my commissioned pieces that runs past 2 years. There's a 4th collection that exists right now, mostly in a notebook I carry everywhere, and sketches and material notes and half-finished ideas that keep me up at night in the best possible way. I am 31 years old. I have not once regretted leaving. That's not quite true. I have regretted the shape of it sometimes, the abruptness, the finality, the years of silence that followed. I have regretted that there was no version of that conversation with my father that could have gone differently. I have regretted that my mother was collateral to something that was never really about her. But the choice itself? The act of walking out that door with my tools and my waiting list and my complete inability to be what my father needed me to be? Not once. I think about that morning sometimes. The kitchen table, the folded hands, the letter sliding across the formica. I used to feel the memory as something sharp, and I think now I feel it as something else, not soft exactly, but no longer cutting. It was the moment someone handed me my own life by mistake, thinking they were taking it away. My dad retired last year. I know this because my aunt told me, not because he told me. She said he seemed smaller somehow. She said my mom was thrilled to have him home, and he was driving her insane by the 3rd week. I thought about calling him. I thought about it for a long time. Maybe I will. Maybe not this month. Maybe not this year. But someday, I think, when I can do it from a place that has nothing to prove, not to him, not to myself, I think I will call. And I think I will have a lot to say. And I think, maybe, he will finally be ready to hear it. Until then, I have work to do. I have 10 acres and a creek and mountains going purple in the afternoon light, and a piece of white oak in my workshop that has been sitting there for 3 weeks waiting for me to understand it. I think I'm almost there. I've been thinking a lot lately about cause and effect. Not in any grand cosmic sense, just the plain human version of it. The version where your choices stack up quietly over years, and one day you look back and realize the whole shape of your life was determined by a handful of moments you barely recognized as turning points when you were standing in them. The morning my dad slid that letter across the kitchen table, I didn't feel brave. I felt cornered. There's a difference, and I think it matters. Brave is when you choose the harder thing because you believe in it. Cornered is when the easier thing has finally become impossible. I had spent 6 years building furniture in a garage that my own family pretended wasn't there. 6 years of being told in 100 small ways that what I made with my hands had no value. At some point, the weight of that just becomes too heavy to carry and also stay silent. What looked like courage from the outside was really just the moment I couldn't hold the contradiction anymore. And here's what I've come to understand about that. The actions we take when we're cornered reveal something true about who we actually are. My dad, cornered by the idea of a daughter who wouldn't follow his plan, chose control. I, cornered by years of invisibility, chose the work. Neither of us was entirely wrong about what we valued. We were just catastrophically wrong about each other. The thing about building furniture, about building anything real with your hands, is that it teaches you something about integrity that I don't think you can learn any other way. A joint either holds or it doesn't. A surface is either true or it isn't. You can't talk your way around bad craftsmanship. You can't charm a dovetail into fitting if you cut it wrong. The work is honest in a way that most of human life simply is not. And spending years inside that honesty changes how you see everything else. It changed how I saw my family. It changed what I was willing to accept. When my brother called, I already knew what the call was. I knew it the way you know the weather is about to turn. Not because of any single sign, but because of the cumulative pressure of everything leading up to it. And I want to be clear, I don't think he's a bad person. I think he made the choice that felt available to him, which was to lead with need instead of with honesty. I think most people do that when they're scared, but I had spent too many years learning to distinguish between what's structurally sound and what just looks like it is. I could feel where the joint was weak. Saying no to him was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of clarity. There's a version of love that enables people to keep making choices they already know are wrong, and I don't think that version serves anyone. The harder thing, the thing that actually respects someone, is to tell them the truth about what you see, and then let them sit with it. Vivian didn't build an $18 million life by accident. She built it by refusing, over and over and over again, to make the safe choice when the safe choice was also the dishonest one. That's the whole story, really. Not the money, not the estate, the refusal, and I think that's available to anyone. Not the outcome. Outcomes are never guaranteed, but the refusal itself. The choice to keep making something true in a world that keeps offering you easier, softer alternatives. That choice compounds. It builds on itself the way good craftsmanship does, quietly and structurally, until one day you look up and realize what you've made is something that will hold.